All right. Hopefully, you guys can hear me and it's not too loud. I feel like I've been playing with the mic and trying to find the right distance from my face. But welcome back to another episode of What's My 100%. It is Sunday, and well, this is funny. So, any of you who are parents will understand that the gift that it is every once in a while when another parent says, "Oh, let me take your kid after whatever the activity is and give you some free time for a play date." And I was a little bit like, oof, am I going to have time to record an episode of the podcast this week? And the universe said, yes, you will, because this play date sort of carved out some space and time. So very grateful for that, and very grateful to sit down and explore something that I've been thinking about this last week that I wanted to record some thoughts on. And it's really, well, the state of men and the state of men and women and relationships, but really collectively some of the narratives that I have heard sort of circulating about men and the state of men's emotional landscape and how men are doing. There's a lot of talk that's been present for a while, I would say, about the male loneliness epidemic, that men are unable to find partnership in a way that they never have before, or that is, at some staggering, alarming numbers in terms of men and partnering and them building relationships with other people, right? And I sort of want to make the case for why I feel like we've got to shift the way we're talking about this, right? I feel like I want to invite all of us to have a very different conversation, certainly about men, but also just about how we are relating to one another. And I feel so strongly about this, in fact, that hopefully this episode will come out Wednesday, I'm looking at my calendar, the 18th, and I'm going to do a workshop on Thursday, the 19th. If you are around, it's going to be a free workshop from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, called Embodying the Love You Want. And I feel like I'm just like on a mission, you guys. Like, we need to have a very different conversation about how we relate to one another and how we relate to ourselves. And the conversation I want to have about men is sort of a part of this. So here's what brought this up for me. There's this New York Magazine article that I've heard people talking about. And the article was all about an app called Quitter that has just sort of exploded. And I guess this app has had 1.5 million downloads and is bringing in $500,000 in revenue a month, right? So basically what the premise of this app is, and I haven't gotten on the app to do research. I probably should, but maybe before I talk about it, but I just have heard other people talking about it. And basically the premise of the app is that it is supposed to be supportive of men quitting porn. And I think I've heard from several different outlets that the number one Google search of the last few years was, how do I quit using pornography? That there has been a real explosion of men, especially, that have become addicted to pornography. And I think if you just look at the accessibility and the ways that pornography is sort of shows up in our cultural landscape now, as opposed to maybe how it did, I don't know. I don't know when we started watching porn online, to be honest. I mean, I'm like aging myself, but I feel like that actually was a while ago, because I feel like I remember being in my 20s and being in the workplace and someone getting in trouble for watching porn online while he was supposed to be working. So it's been a minute that it's been accessible to us in this way. And what I would say is that there's all of these different factors in terms of the ways that we've sort of been so socialized to really be more isolated and more, hesitant to be in relationship to one another in a way where we are really seen and valued and experience one another in a humane way. That I think it's just a really understandable progression outcome that so many men have become addicted to porn. And what I've been a little bit saddened by, if I'm honest, is seeing some of the responses online of people sort of making fun of this app, making fun of the fact that this app is supposed to be some sort of a solution, how many men are downloading this app and sort of thinking that this is going to be the solution to a much larger problem that they're not addressing. I've heard people say things like, this is, just like so simplistic. You guys need to go to therapy and things like that. And let me just say this, and I'm going to say this pretty clearly. I think we need to stop telling men to just go to therapy as if that is some sort of overarching solution to the complexity of what the collective, and I won't even just say men, what all of us are really attempting to course correct and get honest about in terms of thousands of years, a very long history of a patriarchal structure and way of operating societally that is in its final days, that we are living through the extinction burst of a societal paradigm that is no longer sustainable. And that's in so many different facets. That's in, capitalism and what we are doing to the earth that we inhabit. That is certainly what is happening to our relationship dynamics. But I think the reason I want us to stop saying, you need to go to therapy is because, well, a couple things. First of all, that I think it really sort of is dismissive and just like, go figure it out, right? Which none of us are, obligated to do anything more than say, good luck, figure it out. We all have free will. And yet I think men are half of the population. Men are certainly the majority of the population that are responsible for committing violent crimes currently. And men are the number one, white, cis, hetero men are the number one part of the population that are dying by suicide. And so I think if we also think about the fact that in terms of the structures and the powers that be as they currently stand, most of these structures are run for the most part by white cis hetero men as well. So if these men are in a tremendous amount of pain, which when I think of pornography and I think of the anesthetization of challenging feelings that I see come up when I'm working with couples, and this is something that is at the forefront of what they are talking about or struggling with, it is a lot of times a way that sort of compulsively I have used pornography as a tool, as something to self-soothe, and it's sort of become my coping strategy, and it becomes a maladaptive coping strategy, but that is what I am using currently. And so in the same way that if someone were struggling with another addiction, like if someone had a cocaine addiction, we might say, just go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting or just like get to a meeting. Sure, but that's also just a really sort of inhumane, lacking curiosity, lacking a desire to connect response to someone who is really struggling. And in that response, I think that makes that person feel just that much more isolated, right? And I think that the reason this many men, like when you think about 1.5 million downloads, that is 1.5 million downloads of people attempting to seek some support for something that they really feel like they are struggling to do by themselves, which is quit something that they don't feel good about doing or that they see is not serving them. And I think, whatever the intentions are of the creators of this app, at least it is them attempting to do something to be a source of support, right? Which I think when we are just sort of talking about the toxicity of men and masculinity, or sort of saying like, you need to go to therapy and you need to just sort of like get honest about what is going on, it doesn't really feel like it's in the realm of solutions, right? And I hear so often that in the dating landscape that women are really frustrated with the men that they are attempting to date, when we're talking about women that are attempting to date men, that there's just a tremendous amount of avoidance and inability to be in emotional vulnerability, and that they just have zero ability to communicate or be curious. and like no education around women and women's sexuality and women's needs and women's desires. And, you know, I don't know. I'm like, I want to be really clear. I don't know that you're wrong. You very well may be correct in all of those things that you're speaking about. But, you know, I think there is something about what we experience in life being really aligned with what we believe to be true. And here's what I want to talk about and what I mean when I say that. One of my favorite quotes of all times is this Roald Dahl. I think that's how you say his name. A Roald Dahl quote where he says, "Above all, watch with glittering eyes the whole world around you, because the greatest secrets are always hidden in the most unlikely places. Those who don't believe in magic will never find it." And I love that quote so much because to me, it is such a potent reminder about how we don't experience what we desire in life. We experience what we believe to be true. And I can't tell you how often I have been sitting with a group of women at a retreat that is predominantly women or all women, and they will be saying, you know, all of these things that you're saying about love and relating, Dene, that's great. And there are no men, though, that are on board with this, or there are no men that can meet me there in the type of dynamics that you're talking about, like that level of personal responsibility. I can't do that with the men in my life. There are no men who have these capabilities. And I will say, woo, sister, settle down with that talk, because words are spells and you are casting some powerful witchcraft right now. We don't experience what we want. We experience what we believe to be true. Can't convince me otherwise, you guys. And I remember there was a point in my own path where I realized that so much of my programming, so much of my conditioning from growing up, from, you know, family of origin and those who loved me so much and were doing what they knew to do to keep me safe in a world where so much of the landscape as they understood it was that I needed to be strong and I needed to be able to take care of myself. And a lot of times I needed to armor up and protect myself from men and what men had historically been in terms of their understanding. So I want to be really clear about that. But what it really taught me in terms of attempting to relate to men was that men cannot be trusted. And that even though you need to be in relationship with a man, you need to always sort of like be ready and armored up and bracing yourself for him to let you down. Now, as you can imagine, being in a relationship with someone who is just always looking to see the worst in you, that's a lot of times what ends up happening, what we end up experiencing. First of all, that's just like a very defeating way to be viewed by the person in your life, certainly by your beloved, certainly by your partner, if that's the context that we're talking about, right? But I think for me, that was sort of the energy that I carried in my relationships with men in general. I'm not proud of this fact, but I forgive myself because it's something I've come to understand the deeper layers of why this was the case. But I used to talk about men in really disparaging ways, whether it was men in the workplace or men in society. And, you know, just that like I felt like men were there to be manipulated, that they couldn't be trusted, and that, you know, I didn't have a lot of reverence or respect that I held for men and masculinity. And I often share that it was the experience of giving birth to a little boy that changed me in the most cataclysmic way, where I thought to myself, if he were to grow up and is someone who loves women and wants to be in a relationship with a woman, I would never want him to be with a woman that treated him the way that I've treated men, that viewed men the way that I view men. I would just want something so much better for him than myself. And what I really understood about the psychology of that was that he wasn't going to choose that for himself if he'd never seen it modeled for him. And so I really made a decision that I needed to be a different kind of woman. And in order to be a different kind of woman, since, you know, I came to this realization and then was really sort of like grappling with some of the choices and decisions I'd made in my life that were out of alignment in terms of relating and relationships, right? And so, after I separated from my child's father, I decided I need to like really heal this relationship that I have with men and masculinity. And I need to be so curious and ask for support of life, of source, like show me, help me to heal this, help me to be a different kind of woman who experiences men differently, but also please show me why there are so many men and experiences of men and women interacting with one another that are just like beautiful and healing and life affirming and all of these things that I would want for my little boy to experience. Please allow me to have that experience myself so that I can really believe in it as a felt sense of reality, right? And what ended up happening over several years of just really being in the decision to be in sacred solitude for the most part, not dating a lot, but really deciding that I wanted to cultivate relationships with men that were rooted in friendship and without agenda, and us getting to know one another on the terms of our humanity. What I experienced was so many men who were just some of the most supportive, loving forces I've ever had in my life. So many facets. I'm going to cry as I think about it. But, I have had like a complete recalibration in how I experience what is going on here and the way that we are socialized to be in these energetics of just being at odds with one another, and that serves a very specific agenda that we're sort of playing into in ways that we're not conscious of, right? And it's one of those things, like we can't judge ourselves for what we didn't know until we know it, but I think we've got to really ask ourselves why. If I start with us as women, those of us who are women, why this has been painful for us to carry this narrative of being at odds with men, as oftentimes we are attempting to be in relationship with them. I can't tell you how often I'll be sitting with a client who's talking to me about the extent to which she hates men and men are trash. And I'm like, then why are you dating them? Like, stop that. And if you don't like men, then don't be in relationship with them. And I say that without any, shade or righteousness, because I've been there, but it's something to think about, right? Like if this thing is something that I don't really respect and find loving and life affirming and expansive, then maybe I need to take a step back and look at that for a while, right? But I think this thing of what is happening with men and why so many men are addicted to pornography, there is something about what this society has trained men to believe about their innate worthiness and where that worthiness resides, and that they are right now living in a societal template where they feel, I think, really like, what is the point? And what do I do if I feel like I'm falling short of this protect, provide, procreate template that I talk a lot about us giving men in terms of where their worth resides, right? So if I feel like I'm not able to be a provider because the jobs that I had been believing that I would have, or the things that I thought I would do for work to earn a living, like I'm really struggling with that. Maybe I'm throwing out some scenarios here. But I'm living at home with my parents, or I'm really struggling to make ends meet and living with roommates, like whatever it is, but I'm not what the societal template of like a powerful, financially successful man would be. And that makes me worthy. And that makes me, there's so much about like the extent to which you have to be able to externally demonstrate something in terms of your providership, and that makes you a quote high value man or something. Like these are, and listen, I want to say these are sort of caricatures of societal templates, but they matter when they're in the cultural zeitgeist in terms of how the psyche processes these things in terms of self-worth, right? So that's why I'm naming things that I think can feel like, well, that's sort of far-fetched or not what most people believe to be true. But if it's there and it's sort of in the cultural lexicon, it starts to impact how people feel about themselves, right? So I feel like I'm really struggling to be a provider, that's not something like I could never meet a, if I'm dating girls, I could never meet a girl, but I could never meet someone and feel like I have anything to offer. So I'm not even going to do that. Right. But I have these primal desires to procreate, to connect, to be the sexual being that I am. Right. And so pornography becomes this really potent alleviator of that pain point, that need, right? I can sort of channel all of that energy into something that is never going to reject me, is never going to ask me to step out of my comfort zone in terms of all of these things that I feel a lot of shame about, right? Like if I'm struggling with anxiety or depression or all of these things that are really, have me in a place where I feel like I'm sort of stagnated. And I don't have to have that witnessed by another person that I imagine is judging me if I'm just sort of connecting with a screen. And, as artificial intelligence becomes even more prevalent in our lives, I think that becomes even a more interactive way for someone to connect with technology and not feel like they have to be in the historic pain points of where they were shamed relationally. Because so often, you guys, what I've been so struck by as, someone who sits with men and when I've worked with male clients is how often certainly men are defending against being shamed by other men and, some of their historic father wounding, but they are also deeply afraid of being shamed by women and the times that they have been shamed or rejected by women. And so I think there's just a real lack of, with this protect, provide, procreate template, if I feel like I can't be a provider and I feel like procreation, the desire for it is still there, but there's no one for me to protect and I don't have confidence in myself. I just think, first of all, the 3P template of worthiness is so limited in terms of the deep complexity of who we are as human beings, and certainly all of the beautiful integrated aspects of a man's feminine essence that I just think we've got to start being a little bit more realistic about the way that we condition men to shut down half of their being, and then we sort of make them wrong for that for the rest of their lives, right? And so I don't want to be another person who just sits and is in conversation about the problem. I want to be a person who is really invested in and in conversation about what I see as the solution. And to me, so much of the solution is, and this is the unpopular eat your vegetables, is one of my girlfriends. Shout out to Susan, if you're listening. I often am saying things that can feel in the moment like, I need you guys to eat your vegetables. And some of that is like that we need to step away from one another and really do the work, one, to know thyself, to get into the space of knowing thyself well. And this is everybody. I don't care about your gender. I don't care about your sexual orientation. I think that the extent to which we as a society have really, I've said this before, stepped away from valuing a certain level of spiritual solitude, a certain level of being in the inquiry of like the journey to knowing myself well and really being rooted in a sense of inner authority is really impacting us societally. So this thing of, living a more self-actualized life and really questioning, like, what did I come into this life to do and be? And what do I want my truth to be when I take my last breath in this lifetime, in this skin, right? Real talk. And I think that it can feel like, oh, that's sort of morbid, Dene, or you're going there with some pretty deep concepts. And I would say to that, yes, I am. And I think we're past the point where we need to be having a little bit of a more depthy conversation about who we want to be and what we want our legacy to be when we leave this life. And I don't think that legacy needs to be about anything where you have like fame and fortune. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about, how do I want to impact my community? How do I want my neighbors to remember who I was to them? What do I want people to say if there's, a funeral or some sort of a celebration of life? Like, what do I want my impact to be on the world around me in this lifetime? And I remember I was sitting with one of my, advisors, someone who, when I was in clinical training, he was just saying, like, one of the most important questions any man can ask himself is like, what kind of man do I want to be? And I think we have really been a society that has been lacking in elders who've ushered men, young boys, into the process of initiation into manhood, where they really get to ask themselves that question: what kind of man do I want to be? Right? Like, what do I stand for? What is my mission with the time that I have in this skin? Right? And I want to be so unbelievably clear, even as I am having this conversation and a little bit maybe speaking about my brothers. Certainly, if you're listening, speaking to my brothers with so much just love for you, and that we have really been a world that has not set our brothers up for what is being asked of them. And yet, right? And yet to me is, this is like the internal initiation. This is the, like, I have to, like, from the soul space, have that part of me that is driven to really question what I want my life to be and who I want to be as a man, right? Like, that sometimes there are some fires that no one is going to walk you through, that someone can't sit in that fire with you. And that a little bit, I think, and this is kind of hard for me to articulate what's coming up, but there's a way that I believe these societal structures have really brainwashed the collective of men to believe that they are not capable of that somehow. And that's just like coming through, and I don't even know or sort of have a lot of basis for why I'm saying that. It's just like what I believe to be true, that the goal is to be as comfortable as possible, to have access to as much instant gratification as possible, to never be tested in that initiatory space, so that you show yourself what Dene, what you are capable of. And to me, that is where self-confidence is rooted, right? Like, when we show ourselves what we are capable of, when we prove to ourselves that we are trustworthy, that is sort of that unshakable sense of self that I believe so often we are not supporting young men in any sort of threshold into that initiatory period of coming into that understanding, right? And so when they are sort of in that stunted space of like a prolonged adolescence, we shame them for that. And we shame them while continuing to sometimes support that behavior and that understanding of, boys will be boys and boys are inept, so we have to do things for them. No, they're not. They're not, and no, we don't. And that's just not true. It truly isn't. And I think there's like, and when I say we shame them, we look at them as though they are inept. Again, that's me sort of speaking about like the cultural zeitgeist and like the way that like sitcoms hold men, and the way that we sort of speak about like, my husband can't do anything, I have to do it for, like, I think that has to stop. And this is where I sort of like shift a little bit, and I start talking to my sisters and saying, I can't tell you how often I'll be having these conversations with women at retreats, and we'll be talking about these aspects of masculine and feminine energetics. And when I tell you guys, one of the first things a group of women without fail always say is, how do I get my husband here? Like, what do I do to bring my husband into this understanding? Because I really think that he needs to do X, Y, Z. How do I do that for him? And I say, my love, you don't. You can certainly share, what came alive for you during this time and what you came to understand about yourself, but you bringing him to where you believe that he needs to be, you bringing your husband to where you believe that he needs to be is the equivalent of continuing to perpetuate that prolonged adolescence. That is not believing in his ability to stand in his own authority as a man and as an adult, right? And that's actually not as helpful as we believe that it is. I think one of the most loving sentiments that, and this is gender aside, but that we can express to another human being is, I believe in you. I believe in all that you are, in your essence. I believe in your soul's path and what you came here to do and be. And I really believe that there's so much stepping back from the pair bonding that all of us need to do till one, we can start to believe in ourselves because we have sort of walked through some of those fires of initiation. But two, without agenda. And I'm saying this so strongly, like the without agenda part. Without agenda, look at one another in our humanity and say, I believe in you. I'm not going to fix this for you. I'm not going to do this for you. Again, across gender aside, but that I believe in who you are and I value you for who you are, not what you can do for me. I think there's got to be a lot more of this, like, we fill ourselves up with a sense of self so that we don't need to extract it from another person, and that we stop believing that our power resides outside of ourselves in all ways. And so this is sort of like, if the addiction is to pornography, I need to show myself why I don't need anything, technology, whatever else it is that I might be anesthetizing with and through. I don't need those things to be whole. But in order to do that, I have to ride the waves of discomfort that come up when I attempt to stop using whatever it is I've been using. I have to do some esteemable acts. I have to do things that make me proud of myself and proud of myself for keeping promises that I've made. And I really have to get out of my head and get into being of service to someone else, right? Now, all of those things, I kept saying, I have to be responsible for doing this. I think so often what we do as a society is we point the finger at other people and here's what you need to do. And you need to go to therapy and you need to get this figured out. Certainly we can say, I'm here to support you. Let me know what would feel like support right now, right? I think that can be a really empowering statement. You're asking that person to get clear on what would feel like support from me. But I think that there's something in, I can be a part of the community that I want to create. I can take responsibility for me being that. But I think there's so much more of a need for each of us to, like, from that hallowed space of the stillness within and the knowing that resides within me, saying, how do I serve right now? How do I get clear on how I can show up in the smallest way to start and just give something to someone else, not with agenda, not because I'm hoping that in return they're going to do X, Y, or Z for me, but just like, how do I show up and be some of what I want to experience more of in the world, right? How do I be that? How do I say, let it begin with me and let me take responsibility for being that thing that I want the world to express more of, right? And I think that is like what community that is not rooted in codependency, but community that is rooted in a sense of sovereignty and self-belief looks like and feels like, right? I think seeing that 1.5 million men downloaded an app saying that they are really struggling with something, and that our response is, yeah, we know, figure it out. It just kind of like breaks my heart. I feel like it's just so inhumane that we are just at a place where we sort of believe from a sense of righteousness that my side of the fence is all clean. That there's nothing that I am struggling with. A lot of times the righteousness is the drug of choice, or the addiction, or let me just like stop there for a second. The idea that I've like got it all figured out, or I'm a good person on the right side of history, and pointing my finger at other people. Like, I think all of us, if we are really clear and calm and get still, we all have blind spots. We all have an inventory that we could do. We all have ways that we could show up in this moment and be a part of the world that we want to create in ways that we're figuring out how to get it done, right? But I think we've got to care about one another in ways that really allow for our messiness. Nobody's like just like sailing all the time without any difficulty. But I think it's really important that we start with what I was describing, starting from at that point when I said, I really want to like refresh and heal my relationship with men and masculinity. It was really about me saying, how do I just get to the place where I can be with men and really come back to the recognition of their humanity, that they're human just like this guy, just like me, and doing their best to navigate so many complexities of what this human experience is, and that we heal in the space of saying, oof, complex for you, same, complex for me, right? Not like, here's what you need to know about yourself and get to therapy and let me know when you figured it out, right? I just don't think that's how we're going to get back to the space of loving one another and really holding one another as sacred and with deep reverence. That has not been my experience, but excuse me, I truly believe that there is something I've come to understand in terms of the path back to ourselves. And as we find the path back to ourselves, then we get to move forward in the space of inspired action towards community, towards connection. And then when it comes to connecting in terms of love and relationships and, the sacred sensuality and sexuality that, that's a whole other podcast, a whole other episode, right? But really seeing one another again, and not just in the space of dehumanizing one another that I think we've gotten so deep in the trenches of doing. I think we've got to be able to see ourselves as sacred first, right? So let it begin with me. Always, right? So I had to laugh a little bit when I pulled the card for this conversation, which was from the Zodiac Tarot. I love this tarot deck too, because it's another one of those ones that gives you some insight into astrology. Little tickle. And I felt a little emotional. It's just so beautiful. But the card that I pulled was the Lovers. You see that? Those of you watching on YouTube. And the Lovers is from the sign of Gemini. And I think that's like the root point. I'm not really sure on this deck, but it's the sign Gemini is characterized by a communicative ability, by the need to investigate and know. Mutable and free, it is tied to the air element and governed by the planet Mercury, a symbol of communication and mobility. When we speak of Gemini, we're in the realm of mind and intellectual reasoning. Likewise, the Lovers card portrays two people, two complementary elements, often a man and a woman, positioned in the form of a triangle, with an angel that watches over from above. This card is tied to the possibility of choice. What path will you take? Have you assessed all aspects of the matter? It represents the multiple parts of us, masculine and feminine, and their nuances. Together, the two figures and the angel can share something about the body, mind, and spirit. Our ability to choose increases and is aware when we listen carefully to these three voices. Something to share about the body, mind, and spirit. The keywords are choice, variety, possibility, choosing with the heart, and partnership. Yeah. I often say, Men are taught not to feel, and women are taught not to care that men don't feel. And the reason I say that is because I think we live in a society that, because we have lived through hundreds and how many years of patriarchal dominance, some would say and oppression many times, we are really taught as women to focus on, rightfully so, let me be clear, all of the pain that we have experienced as women in a patriarchal structure, in a patriarchal society, right? But what ends up happening is we don't think a lot about the way that men are socialized in the same society, and that there's a point when little boys are taught, you don't get to feel anymore. You don't even get to wear pink anymore, because that will mean something about your manhood and whether you're man enough. You have to fight people even when you don't want to fight and when you're afraid. And you can't talk about the fact that you're afraid, because your friends will think you're a punk, or they will think that you are weak if you lose a family member and go to school and you cry about it, right? You have to pretend as though you are not destroyed when your heart is broken, because that will make you a simp or whatever society decides to call you. And oh my goodness, if you are struggling with your mental health, or if you feel overwhelmed and afraid and unsure in this life, as we all inevitably do as human beings, figure it out. Hope you can afford some therapy. Get there, right? And again, we got to be able to hold multiple truths at the same time, because I am not in any way, shape, or form excusing any of the harm that is done in this world by and at the hands of men. I'm just not. And we got to be able to hold the complexity of wanting to understand how we got here is never the same thing as saying harm is okay, you guys. But if we can't hold the complexity of attempting to understand, nothing changes about these patterns. And, I think there's this documentary, because I've heard people talking about it sort of peripherally. I haven't paid a ton of attention, but I've heard people talking about like a manosphere documentary. I'm going to suggest you don't watch it. I said what I said, because I think that we need to stop giving attention to the wounding and the wounded masculinity, and sort of utilizing that as some sort of evidence of what is happening with men or where men are. And I think we need to start celebrating the heck out of the men who we feel so unbelievably inspired by and moved by the way they move through the world and the way they show up and the way showers that they are, and the possibility that we experience through their essence. And that's just the conversation that I'm really excited and interested in having. And on that note, funny enough, I am actually so excited, and I've shared about this on social media a little bit, but I'm going back to Kripalu May 16th through 21st with one of the men who I feel so clearly embodies all of those qualities that I'm talking about, and that's Joel Cross. And he is just the most incredible human who has an online community and is a meditation teacher and a musician, and just gives these incredible, lives where he, like I say often, they're like Dharma talks, but he is someone who I've been so impacted by the way that he moves through the world, and the way that I learned from him, and the way that he shows up in so many of the aspects of what I'm talking about, that willingness and that trajectory that he's walked of sort of going back home to himself and being in that initiatory phase of coming back into the integrated self, so that I am embracing all facets of who I am, so that I can show up in the world in that way. And so he and I are going to co-host this retreat at Kripalu together. And it's not for couples. It's not about relationships. It's about us coming back together as humans and being in relationship to one another, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, all of these variables of how the world has taught us we are other or different from one another, but just to be in community without agenda and enjoy one another's presence. And I'm so excited for the opportunity to do this with someone who has been such a profound teacher in my life and someone who I am so inspired by. And I hope that if, what we've been talking about, or what I've been talking about, it's just me, Dene, what I've been talking about for these last 45 minutes is inspiring to you in terms of just like being exhausted by the conversation about what is wrong and really wanting to be a part of creating solution. I hope that you will come and join us. What I love about Kripalu is that it's like, depending on where you are in the country or where you're located, it's really accessible. It's a place where you can come and stay on campus and just be in community in a really powerful way. And I think that this retreat for me feels like a giant reset opportunity for us just to come together and see one another and experience one another in such a sacred container. And I really feel clear that I know that is what Joel and I both are going to hold space for us all collectively creating. And in addition to him just being like the most incredible meditation teacher, he's also a musician, and he offers these sound baths that are just like the divine holding you in, I don't know, I don't even have the words sometimes, but really, really potent medicine. And so, yes, I would love if that all sounds like something that resonates. It's May 16th through 21st, and I will put that in the show notes. No, May 17th through 21st. Sorry, guys. But I'll put that in the show notes. And again, this week, I think this workshop that I want to do on embodying the love that you want is really another way that we're talking about taking responsibility for how I'm showing up so that I can see those around me clearly, right? Like, how do I let my 100% that I'm going to take be, that I want to be that thing, that I want to be the love that I am seeking to experience more of in the world. Again, let it begin with me, right? And I think so much of what this Lover's card is that I've come to understand about love over the last several years is just the true work of love and partnership is about choosing to lead from the heart over and over again as the most devotional practice every day. And when fear inevitably starts to creep its little head in and tell you why you're being shortchanged, or tell you why you're not enough, or tell you how you need to defend yourself at all costs, what would love say, right? How would love respond in this moment? Can I find my way back to that over and over again? And, I think I've been so impacted by Bell Hooks and the way that she talks about men and masculinity. And I'm paraphrasing how she talks about it, but it's really in alignment with that Roald Dahl quote, right? If we want a society of integrous, grace-filled, compassionate, integrated men, one, we got to believe that it's possible. We got to breathe and speak life into those who are doing that work and walking that walk right now. And we've got to really start to put an emphasis on that it's already done, like believing in the possibility of it, right? We can't experience what we don't believe is possible. And I think that we have to, if you're not a man, if you're a woman, really take responsibility for how have I integrated my own healthy masculine within me in the same ways that I'm looking for or seeking for men to integrate that healthy feminine within themselves. And a lot of times, like if we think about what like the healthy masculine energetic is, it sees the big picture and holds space with just like a loving, calm reverence, and holds the complexity without letting fear take over. And so it's like, where am I lacking sometimes in some of my own healthy masculine containment around situations and people and how I'm speaking about things, right? I think we are just really entering the age where all of our power resides within ourselves, and it is our work to see that so clearly and stop looking for this savior to come do and be that. Because even if we're sort of in the conversation around like someone just needs to go to therapy and that's going to fix everything, that's a hell of a tall order to put on any therapist. And as someone who's been a therapist, please don't put that on them. But also, if I think about the things that have been most supportive of my healing journey, certainly therapy's been a part of it, but I gotta tell you, it's been a whole lot more than that. It's been, community, it's been coaches, it's been somatic movement, it's been Mother Nature. Oh my God, it's been, deep spiritual work. Like, we are talking about a complete revamping of how all of us experience what it is to come into the remembrance, we were never not whole, but the remembrance of our wholeness. But I think the quickest way for us to get there is for us to see it and believe in it in one another, right? And so anyway, this conversation continues. And I feel like, it's so much easier to talk about it in community. So I hope that you will join me this Thursday if you're around. Again, I'm going to put it in the show notes, but that's 4 to 5:30, March 19th. If you're listening before then, you can register at the link that I will put below in the show notes. And if you can't make it on Thursday, I would love to see you at Kripalu with me and Joel Cross, because we're going to get deep into the conversation there. And I love that we will have several days to get into it, right? Because we're going to get into all the topics and have a lot more time to unpack how we make our way back home to ourselves so that we can show up as that vessel of what we want to see more of in the world. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your buy-in to having conversations that are complex to have, but we are oh so capable of having them. Be well, take really good care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.